Maybe it was the Kennedy assassination. I literally had a giant shift in how I viewed the world after reading that book. Because before that, I was never a questioner of whatever was in the news or whatever the narrative was that we were being told about anything.
Well, but, I mean, I have exactly the same reaction to that story, and I've been down that rabbit hole. And I think you're just ultimately left with a question. Something happened in 1963. That's before either of us were born, right?
Right.
That thing was either an anomaly that robbed the nation of a president and the nation continued to be a democratic republic in the aftermath of it, or that was interference with democracy, and we don't know how to look at all of the seemingly democratic things that have happened since. How much of what has happened since are the people who took control with that assassination? How much is them continuing to maintain control with a certain amount of democracy? And how much was that an aberration that then returned us to our normal course? And
that's a good point. A certain amount of democracy.
A certain amount. There's clearly a certain amount.
Yeah. Well, which is one of the reasons why they're so terrified of Trump. Like there's a certain amount of the stealing they can do. If let's imagine if it is dirty and you really can manipulate elections, how much can you manipulate by? Can you manipulate it by 30%? You know, because we don't know. And as long as they can have you believing in the polls, this is what's really important. Polls. Kamala Harris is up by 3%. Oh, she's up. She's winning.
What narrative is it in which Kamala has done something that might have caused a surge in her popularity? Like, I didn't see it.
Well, some magic.
But to your point about how much can they cheat, I call that factor, which none of us can put a number on. Maybe they can.
Right.
I call it the cheat factor, right? The cheat margin. And one of the things that I'm trying to convince people of is that it's not hopeless because they can cheat, but it means that you have to succeed at a level that exceeds their capacity to erase it.
Right, so that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about, like, maybe they can cheat by 10%.
Right, and what we know, and I think actually we owe Trump a huge debt of gratitude for proving something that I couldn't have told you if it was true before he won the presidency, which is there still enough democracy left in the system for something to upend the plan? Right? Because he was clearly off narrative.
Right.
And he did become president. So he did something for us that I don't know anybody else who could have done it.
Yeah, it would take a person with that kind of personality that could withstand that kind of abuse. Because he didn't freak out at all when they went after him. He's like,
Right.
Just brushed it off like it was nothing.
You wrote, it's impossible to understand the Democratic Party in traditional terms. What does that mean?
It means it's not a political party. It has been captured by something that has objectives that have no place in a democratic society. And it has engineered a false coalition to demand preposterous things, to rationalize the abuse of power that it exercises when it is in office. So if you think about it as a group of Americans who have a view of the way the country should be governed, you'll be scratching your head. If, on the other hand, you think of it as a hostile force, one that has no interest in the well-being of average Americans or indeed in the meaningful continuation of the republic itself, it makes a lot more sense. And the people who are vocally supporting it are in some ways victims of a psychological operation that has convinced them to support things that are frankly unholy.
When we spoke at the start of the year, I said it was way too close to November to switch anybody out. Turns out that I was wrong.
Beginner's luck.
You said, what are the odds that Joe Biden has a debilitating event between now and November, including death? So he runs a 1 in 20 chance of dying in any given year or above, that I don't think you know whether he's even going to make it to November. Debilitating event could have been a debilitating public event.
I purposely left it vague, and I didn't say the other part of it, which I now feel comfortable saying, which is I don't know whether Donald Trump will be allowed to become president.
What do you mean by that?
I think that there's a remarkable story, and we're in a funny game, which is, are we allowed to say what that story is? Because to say it, to analyze it, to name it, is to bring it into view. I think we don't understand why the censorship is behaving the way it is. We don't understand why it's in the shadows. We don't understand why our news is acting in a bizarre fashion. So let's just set the stage, given that that was in February. There is something that I think Mike Benz has just referred to as the rules-based international order. It's an interlocking series of agreements, tacit understandings, explicit understandings, clandestine understandings about how the most important structures keep the world free of war and keep markets open. And there has been a system in place, whether understood explicitly or behind the scenes or implicitly, that says that the purpose of the two American parties is to prune the field of populist candidates so that whatever two candidates exist in a face-off are both acceptable to that world order. So what you're trying to do from the point of view, let's take it from the point of view of, let's say, the State Department, the intelligence community, the Defense Department, and major corporations that have to do with international issues, from arms trade to, food. They have a series of agreements that are fragile and could be overturned if a president entered the Oval Office who didn't agree with them, and the mood of the country was, why do we pay taxes into these structures? Why are we hamstrung? Why aren't we a free people? So what the two parties would do is that they would run primaries. You'd have populist candidates, and you'd pre-commit the populist candidates to support the candidates who won the primaries. As long as that took place and you had two candidates that were both acceptable to the international order, that is, that they aren't going to rethink NAFTA or NATO or what have you, we called that democracy. And so democracy was the illusion of choice, what's called magician's choice, where the choice is not actually, pick a card, any card, but somehow the magician makes sure that the card that you pick is the one that he knows. In that situation, you have magician's choice in the primaries, and then you'd have the duopoly field two candidates, either of which was acceptable, and you could actually afford to hold an election. And the populace would vote, and that way the international order wasn't put at risk every 4 years, because you can't have alliances that are subject to the whim of the people in plebiscites. So under that structure, everything was going fine until 2016. And then the first candidate ever to not hold any position in the military nor position in government in the history of the Republic to enter the Oval Office, Donald Trump, broke through the primary structure. So then there was a full court press. Okay, we only have one candidate that's acceptable to the international order. Donald Trump will be under constant pressure that he's a loser, he's a wild man, he's an idiot, and he's under the control of the Russians. And then he was going to be a 20-1 underdog. And then he wins. And there was no precedent for this. They learned their lesson. You cannot afford to have candidates who are not acceptable to the international order and continue to have these alliances. This is an unsolved problem. So I don't have a particular dog in this fight. I, believe in democracy. I also believe in international agreements. And it is the job of the State Department, the intelligence community, and the Defense Department to bring this problem in front of the American people and say, we have a problem. You don't know everything that's going on. And if you start voting in populist candidates, you're going to end up knocking out load-bearing walls that you don't understand.
But Trump was in office for 4 years. Did he turn the entire table upside down?
He risked doing that.
Say more.
You remember that there was this uncomfortable accommodation given to the Central Intelligence Agency at the beginning of his actual term. There was a question about was he going to question I have a very different point of view than most of my friends who are also, at least nominally Democrats, which is it was a very immoral thing that was done to him. He was asked the question, will you pre-commit that you will accept the results of an election? Now, if you were going to rig an election, you would ask somebody that to begin with, and that's part of the game. And he says, well, we'll see. So you have this very strange thing going on where democracy is the greatest threat to democracy. Now, how can that be? It's two different concepts of democracy. One concept of democracy is the will of the people. You hold plebiscites. And even if you do it with an electoral college or political parties, the idea is that the people are elected, by and of and for the people. The other idea of democracy is that democracy is about institutions that sprang from democracy once upon a time, and that those institutions have to be kept strong. Those are two completely different concepts that are overloaded to the same word. Under that circumstance, we have a paradox, which is how do we keep the electorate from overturning the type A democracy from overturning the type B democracy? And that's the unsolved problem that they will not bring in front of the people. So what you have is a situation in which I believe that there are many people in Washington, D.C. who think that Donald Trump cannot become president because he can now go for broke. He's also not going to try to run for re-election. He's relatively unconstrained. He's wealthy. He's learned how to play a lot of these games.
And maybe got a little bit of an axe to grind as well after the last 6 years.
No kidding. And he's a wild card. There are three people who are doing amazing versions of the drunken boxing game. Kanye, who's probably the first one to really fail, Elon, and Donald Trump. And all three of them tried to do something where you couldn't pin them down. You couldn't figure out what they were going to do next. And that's what the order is keeps trying to do. Will you commit to this? Will you say this? Will you mouth these words? And none of these people would play the game. I find this all. You ever see Emmanuel Augustus, this boxer who actually, I think Floyd Mayweather said it was his toughest opponent because he wouldn't fight in a style that anyone could recognize. Probably the most
unpredictable.
And the most entertaining boxer I've ever seen in my life. I mean, just check out any highlight reel and you won't even believe this is real. It doesn't seem possible. So that's what Donald Trump is. He's a guy who's got formulas that confuse people like Sam Harris. Sam and I have been debating this for years. I think that Trump is an incredibly intelligent man and that there's incredible method in his tweets of old. You could put them into a data set and you say that there are 5 or 6 different types of tweets and that the left falls for every one of them every time. So in this situation, you have a question. How is it that Donald Trump and RFK Jr. cannot possibly reach the Oval Office and we have to have a candidate who is pre-subscribed to perpetuating these institutions, these agreements, and these orders? And there's only 1 out of 3 who has that character, and that person has not won a primary. Right now, we have no idea who's running the United States of America. I just came here in a Tesla, and I did not steer once. And I would say America is in full self-driving mode, and we don't know what the AI is that's running the Oval Office. And that's really bizarre, given that we have something like 6 minutes to make a decision about nuclear launches. We have no idea what the United States government in the executive branch actually is. But it can't be Joe Biden.
Every time it seems that an election has happened over the last decade or so, it's always been, this one is different. This is the most important. This is the most important. Is there something different about the one that we're about to go into? How should we think about this election?
As World War II unraveling, the order that has produced the illusion of peace for this length of time. Imagine that you were, let's say in the 2000s, that you had this thing called the Great Moderation. And there was a story that we had finally banished volatility from the markets. None of that was true. What you were doing was you were going farther and farther into a regime without understanding that sooner or later the Jenga tower has to collapse. the order that was put in place at the end of World War II, none of its architects are still alive. Very few pieces of information were passed down about what it actually is or how it functions because it's secret. And I think what you can say is that we are now living on the fumes built from that victory. That is what is unraveling. You're about to head towards a multipolar world where the game theory in a dyadic game of two players doesn't look remotely like the game theory in a 5 or 10 player game. So Kamala is essentially the youngest boomer possible, and she's tied to the last silent generation president we'll ever have, which was a bizarre thing to begin with. And she's pre-committed to trying to continue that order in the guise of a alternatively woke, Wall Street friendly, Indian black, folksy. I don't even know what she is. To quote the great Chris Williamson, she's a meme of a meme of a meme. That was from our last talk. And I would say this is probably the most insane election we've ever seen by a comfortable margin. I would say that there's no one in second place. I can't think of another election that is even close to this bizarre, including the attempted assassination on Donald Trump.
Yeah, there's so many things all coalescing at the same time, from what's happening with the media to AI to discontent to fake news and cheap fakes and constructed.
Sorry. Fake news was a fake story. If you look at the Google Trends, fake news was a tiny story during the 2016 cycle that blew up immediately afterwards. It was the placeholder as the intelligence community or the blob figured out what it was going to do next to try to take control of the international order. You have to realize that that's the first real surprise in presidential history where they lost control of the process.
Well, I've got a surprise for you. I told you not to watch this before we get to do this.
I actually listened.
Did you?
Well, it's weird.
I told you not to do it.
I know. It's like pouring sugar on a picnic to keep ants away.
Okay. So for the people who haven't seen it, we'll just do a quick recap.
MSNBC was exposed today for yet another set of lies. They deceptively edited together this video of different Joe Rogan comments to make it appear that he was singing the praises of Kamala Harris.
She's going to win.
No, she's not.
She can win. She is a strong woman. She is a person who served overseas twice. She in a medical unit. She was a congresswoman for 8 years.
Yeah.
She is a person of color. She's everything you want. She's going to win.
No, she's not.
She can win. They just want no Trump, no matter what.
What do you make of that? That's the most brazen cutting together of something that millions of people have seen.
They don't really, whatever it is not really trying to fool you. It's trying to instruct you. You're allowed to see the truth. They can make it difficult to find the truth, but it's hard to shut up Joe Rogan. They've settled for something else, which is, think about MSNBC and CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Reuters, AP, etc., as a set of instructions for how to keep your job. You're allowed to disagree. We'll set the boundaries of the disagreement. We'll set the topics of the disagreement. You may not even watch any of these things, but we'll make sure that it filters through to the people that you are watching so that they're outraged. And you're given a choice. You can choose to understand whatever you want, and you can choose to say whatever you want. But if you say what you understand to be true, you can know what the consequences are. You may lose your marriage. You may lose your job. You may lose your friends. And so, in essence, we all know that if you question the war in Ukraine, or if you say, look, I detest Donald Trump, but I'm voting for him because what's going on in the Democratic Party is unholy and insane, you're signing up for whatever Thanksgiving dinner we have planned for you. We're talking to your uncle. We're talking to your spouse. And in essence, this is a lot like Caligula installing his horse as a senator. No one's fooled that the horse is an ordinary human senator. The choice is, do you wish to say something?
I'd been trying to find this term for a while that I'd learned through film critics online, people like Critical Drinker, who's a sweary Scottish film critic, and retroactive continuity.
Retcon.
Yeah. But I didn't know what retroactive continuity, I didn't know that that's what retconning, I just knew it as retcon. So retroactive continuity is a literary device in which facts in the world of a fictional work that have been established through the narrative itself are adjusted, ignored, supplemented, or contradicted by subsequently published work that recontextualizes or breaks continuity with the former. So the question is what we're seeing just the Star Wars cinematic universe equivalent?
Yeah, this is Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty, where
falls off a ledge.
And yet here he is again.
It's every episode of South Park when Kenny's died.
So it's very important to understand the back of house in everything that you're doing. So, when you go to a hotel, there's an entirely secondary structure of floors, elevators, entrances, cafes that are necessary to support the front of house, which is the illusion of the hotel that you're staying in. And the same thing is true for screenwriting and the creative arts. I think everyone should, for example, read Save the Cat. It's a book on screenwriting that points out that films aren't broken into scenes so much as they're broken into beats. There are about 40 beats in a film, and the beats have names. And so if you read this book, one is called The Bad Guys Close In, and another beat is called All Hope is Lost. And these are mainstays, and you're programmed client side at a subliminal level to be able to follow a film based on the idea that your brain is already tooled to absorb this stuff. There's a concept called spackle in Hollywood, where it costs a couple of lines to make something that makes no sense make sense. I think it's referenced in Thank You for Smoking, where they're smoking in space and there's an issue with product placement. How does it make sense to have cigarette smoking in space after sex and whatever? Oh, it'll cost us 2 lines of spackle. And so every once in a while, the craft pokes through. And so this is retcon is a back of house concept. And the issue, again, really comes back to professional wrestling. The smark is a smart mark, a person who is being duped and agrees to be duped, but has a metacognitive perch from which to watch his or her own deception. So you're both a consumer of the story. Like when you go to a movie, it's fictional. And you don't sit there saying, this is such BS. The old thing I used to say is you don't scream, don't you understand? It's just photons projected on a wall. We are complicit in our own deception. Otherwise, we'll never be seduced. And there's nothing more wonderful than a seduction to which we are willing and eager. But this is an unwanted seduction. This is coercive. This is based on a lot of carrot being taken away, and more or less all of what you have is stick. If I understand what you just said, I think Kamala has some communism in her appeal. It may not be native to her, but I know that the under 30 crowd is playing with like neo-Marxian ideas, and that I've been told by the Democratic Party, we need their votes. Don't worry. They won't get anywhere inside the party. We just let them mouth off and they don't get any legislation passed. Like I've been told, here's the plan. We need you to stop coming after us. Of course we're hypocritical. We're courting communists because we need the votes to win. But I guarantee you they won't be able to do any damage if we are elected. So now you say something about Kamala and somebody says, I can see the communism. Equity is communism. It's equality of outcome. That the support for October 7th is revolutionary. It's not, you're not talking about liberalism or progressivism. You're talking about calling the murder of parents in front of their children resistance. These sorts of things are confusing us because we have these very strange amalgams. I can tell you that part of Kamala is the appeal to the Hamptons crowd that she will continue the carried interest exemption in the tax code. That doesn't feel very communistic. Another part of her is speaking to, radical Islamists saying, don't worry, we're going to be portraying this as bigotry and Islamophobia. You're just another religion like any other, and you're being subjected to prejudice. So how do you deal with an amalgam where you can't go long and short? I can tell you that there are parts of Donald Trump that I very much appreciate, and there are parts of Donald Trump that make it impossible for me to imagine voting for him. When he was at a rally and there was a protester being led out, and he said, back in the day, we all have our bad Trump. We know how to take care of such people. And if anybody wants to rough these people up, I'll pay your legal bills. And I thought, wow, you have no idea what you just unleashed and you're comfortable with it. I don't want that person with a nuclear football. My discomfort with Donald Trump isn't a class issue or whatever. It's that I saw a temperament that shouldn't be anywhere near that. Kamala Harris shouldn't be anywhere near the nuclear football. I have no idea who's on top of the nuclear football because it can't be Joe Biden. I promise you that. And I've been assured, by the way, that what's really going on is that there's a team that is governing because Biden cannot, and that I should feel, if I knew who these people were, I would be pleased as punch because they're far better than Joe Biden. Can you imagine being told that as an American? We're not going to invoke the Constitution and rid ourselves of a president who's incompetent. We've instead installed a great team that you can't see, so don't worry.
I need to ask you this. Can you please try and explain to me what you interpret by what can be unburdened by what has been? What does that mean?
I don't know if I should say. There's a line in Marx where sometimes you hear certain phrases like a world to win. AOC uses the phrase, we have a world to win, which comes from the end of the Communist Manifesto, originally written in German. It was the name. I used to hang out in the Revolutionary Bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts with the communists because they print everything in every language. So if you're trying to learn multiple languages, they'll print the same text in all of these languages and you can compare. It basically says you have to wipe out what has been to arrive in the new.
And where's it from? What can be unburdened by what has been?
It's not a direct translation, but it occurs in Karl Marx. Now, I wasn't expecting this. I could find you the exact reference. If you think about what Mao had to do to wipe out Chinese history, what Pol Pot had to do, you're trying to wipe out memory because the memory has all of this burden. Why is it important to go after doctors and lawyers and teachers and professors? Because in some sense, they are going to resist the new order that you're about to impose. You're looking for a blank slate.
So like a tether to the past.
Okay, I'm going to tell a story I don't know that I've ever told anyone. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. Can't promise it's original to you. But I was in Hoi An in Vietnam. Now, I'm going to lose this one. Hoi An is one of the only beautiful places that I found, like Hue and Hoi An. A lot of things were really ripped up in that war. And there is an unbelievable and difficult instrument, which the Vietnamese language is very hard, so I'm going to say it wrong, it would be written as Dan Bao. It's one string and a giant lever, and you pluck the harmonics, and it's supposed to be an intimate instrument, I think sometimes played by the blind, where only the person who's intended is the recipient of the music. Okay. I see this in a window in Hoi An, and I become transfixed by it. And a woman says, I see you looking at this in English. Would you like to come in? And I said, I don't want to impose. She says, no, it's not mine. So she invites me in. And there's this guy who appears to be brain dead. He's like deformed. I'm not going to get through this. And he's speaking very haltingly, and I don't know who he is. And something about music, something about journalism, something about a professional. I can't really make out what's happening. I'm asking about the instrument. And this woman brings him a guitar. And this deformed man starts playing some like Chopin or some piano concerto on the guitar at some incredible level. And I can't even imagine that his body can do it. And so I have no idea where I am or what's happening. And then he motions for like a book. And she brings a book. And it has all of these articles about this man tortured for his principled stand against communism. This man has been destroyed, mind, body, to the point where it's just painful to watch him. And I realized that basically do you know what a nail house is? If you Google nail house under Google Images, do it. Or you can't do it, or you're off the internet.
No, I can do it.
Tell me what you see.
It's a tall building, an individual standalone structure in the middle of a road.
There are these people who will not give up their homes when a shopping mall goes in or a road is put. And for some reason, they'll build a highway to screw over the person who stands up and says, I will not move. And the idea is that that road is the future, unburdened by what has been, and then there's some holdout who won't go along with the program.
If Kamala Harris is as unsophisticated as we think she is, do we really believe that she is quoting from the dark depths of...
Why do you believe she is as unsophisticated as you have just claimed? What did her father do?
I don't know.
Look it up. And by the way, I am assuming that I will end up on the Open Skies watch list as a result of this podcast.
That is crazy, by the way, what happened to Tulsi. The quad S on her boarding pass. Donald J. Harris, the father of Kamala Harris, Jamaican-American economist, professor emeritus at Stanford University, originally from St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica.
What kind of economics?
Known for applying post-Keynesian ideas to development economics. What's post-Keynesian?
I don't know.
Post-Keynesian economics is a school of economic thought with its origins in the general theory of John Maynard Keynes' subsequent development influenced to a large degree by a name I can't pronounce.
I think that there was a lot of Marxist thought. And as a man whose family comes from the far left, you recognize certain sorts of commonalities. I'm sure she would see them in me. The Democratic Party is not communist. I don't think that that's right. That's the critique of many of my right-wing friends. But it is welcomed in a lot of neo-Marxian thought. I would say AOC is straight up Marxist. I don't know. I think Kamala is everywhere between crony finance and Marxism. You're talking about things for which you do not have language.
So the reason that I said I don't think that Kamala can be as sophisticated as perhaps this obscure reference said 100 times, apparently, according to the archive.
Who's Charles Mingus?
I don't know.
Kamala's a lot smarter than you're giving her credit for.
I mean, this is the your point about how many levels through it do you go. This is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one.
Yeah.
But in order to be able to do the Ukraine is a country, it is a small country, Russia is a big country, they are a bigger country, this is bad, time is all around us. In order to be able to do that self-referentially, with agency, knowing what you're doing, the metacognition to be able to do that and play a role, to me seems, that's like 200 IQ stuff to be able to do that.
I don't think so. I think it's 130 IQ stuff. I think you could do it better than you think. We could have a pretend, all right, I'm going to talk to you in a way you haven't heard before. Son, I'm going to school you on a few things. You can stop that silly grin and wipe it right off your face. We can sound like however we want. I could affect some sort of Oxbridge accent, or I could do Cockney. It doesn't matter. You're looking at characters. This is why I wrote the 2011 kayfabe essay, because you're looking at professional wrestling. Do you imagine that the Iron Sheik, who is the Iron Sheik? Who is Triple H? Who is the Undertaker? Do you think he actually works in a mortuary? These are characters. George W. Bush, as a debater in Texas for the governorship, was really, really smart. And suddenly he got real dumb and folksy. And do you imagine he actually says nuclear? He knows it's nuclear. I would learn to say nuclear. I could say nuclear. I got to be careful with that nuclear physics. And I can get Democrats to correct me and look like assholes every time. There's an old FDR line, which is nothing in politics happens by accident. Don't get taken in at level one. Look, a friend of mine, Dan Barkay, has a beautiful thing where he says, when someone looks at the window and one person sees the reflection and the other person is looking through the window and what's on the other side, they don't realize that they're seeing different things. I believe that in part, this is a superposition of signals to Wall Street, to Antifa, to organized labor, to women in the workforce worried that they're never going to find mates and have children. These are ridiculous things crafted to appeal to many different people and to be decoded by different groups. Kamala really is scary for very different reasons than Donald Trump is scary. And it's a weird election for me because I know three of these people. I know J.D. Vance, and I know Bobby Kennedy a little bit, and Nicole Shanahan a little bit better. And I don't at all know the Democratic ticket, nor do I know Donald Trump. But Donald Trump isn't who he seems to be. Donald Trump is much more methodical, much better at business, and very shady techniques at that. I think I remember hearing a story about how he bought a bunch of pianos for his hotel and didn't want to pay full price and then explained. Well, I don't know if the story is true, so I'm going to be very clear about that. Allegedly. And I talked to people who are in business with him, and one of whom did serious business with him said to me, he's a very good businessman who you wouldn't want to do a second deal with. These are complex life forms. And I don't know what I'm watching. I do know that I had a meeting sort of by accident with a person in the Democratic Party who really tried to explain to me, Eric, can you hold off on the anti-Democratic Party tweeting? You need a higher level briefing about how we're actually conducting ourselves. I just don't think that the surface is worth very much. We're in a lot of danger